One of the reasons why religious belief can be so difficult to break in the minds of believers is because of the human need for cognitive closure. There's a switch in the brain that turns off thinking the second it finds an answer that it likes. So to me, this happens when I talk to Christians and I will ask them a question about XYZ. Why does God do this or that? And their answer is free will. And to me, the answer of free will is not logical. It actually doesn't make sense because God is giving us that free will. God is one that creates the conditions through which our free will is being expressed. So therefore, it's not our will, it's God's will. But to a believer, free will makes perfect sense. And as soon as they say that it's free will, they're satisfied. They feel the sense of, aha, we got the answer. We can move on. Let's go ahead and talk about something else now. What other questions do you have? Because to them it is satisfying their mind and body for this question. Now, the problem is that logically it doesn't actually solve that question. And to people that are not in the faith, it doesn't fully satisfy them. In fact, it doesn't make sense. But when you're in the faith and you want to continue to believe, they are motivated to believe this, and therefore that answer of free will is enough to satisfy them and enough to keep them believing, which is ultimately what they want to do. So what is actually happening here? Let's look at this from a psychological point of view. And what we find when we dig in here is we see that there is a human need for cognitive closure. So this cognitive closure is a brain button. Think of it like a button that can be pressed that is a psychological safety mechanism that bypasses critical thinking. What that means that it bypasses critical thinking, it means that it stops you from asking more questions. That's what it means when it bypasses critical thinking. It goes around critical thinking. Critical means that you're asking questions about it. You're being critical of it. This stops that. These types of brain buttons stop that. And there are many of these. This is number 8 on the list of psychological safety mechanisms that bypass critical thinking. This is number 8 in the brain buttons. So what that means is that this psychological mechanism, this brain button, this cognitive closure is a built-in feature of the brain that produces a closed system of logic that helps the human to feel safe and eventually stops the asking of new questions. Because more questions equals more uncertainty. If you're asking more questions, there's more things you don't know, and therefore you have to spend more time and energy of your body thinking and processing, which is expensive. Thinking and processing is expensive for food, basically. You need more food. If you're going to think more, you have to have more food. And if we look at the lives of ancient humans, they didn't have an abundance of food all the time. We look at homeostasis. The body wants to be sedentary, it wants to be chilling, it wants to have the answers. It doesn't want to have to be calculating all the time and thinking through these complex problems because that is calorically expensive. It costs a lot of sugar, it costs a lot of fat to be thinking all the time. Humans basically evolved to want certainty. Certainty was safety, and safety kept people alive for longer, and that's why we have those traits. Is because the people that had certainty, because they were the tribe elder, or because they had all kinds of generational knowledge about the plants and the animals and the land, those people that had the certainty survived longer, and they passed those genes down and those traits down, and that's why we have it today. The human mind doesn't like open loops. It doesn't like uncertainty. It will find a way to solve that uncertainty in whatever way it can. And we see this when we look at politics, religion, marketing, business. I mean, we can go down the line. If you walk by your local mall or your local store, you will see in the headlines, you will see in the advertising and in how people speak to each other that this is something that people want at a core fundamental level. And every single human being has to solve for this on the planet. We're going to talk about this a little bit more in a second. But think about all of the doubts that a Christian believer can have. And think about the textbook apologetic answers that are given to them. Think about the basic answers for some of these very common Christian questions. So, like, why would God do these awful things in the Old Testament? Well, it's because it was a different time. It was a different context. That's the answer we're supposed to have when we have that question. Well, why would God allow evil? Oh, it's because if he has to allow evil, it's because he has to allow us too, because we're evil as well. So he can't get rid of evil because he would be getting rid of us, and he loves us, so he can't do that. Why is the world so messed up if God is so good and loving? And of course, the answer is free will. It's because, he gave humans this free will and he's not going to intervene on this free will. So no matter what, and these are, of course, very basic questions about the Christian faith. This is like kindergarten of Christianity, right? This is the first day of Christianity. This is what they tell you the answers to these questions are. No matter what question you have, whether it's simple like these or it's complex like you will get to eventually, it can be boiled down to a response that satisfies the mind of the believer because that believer still wants to believe. And there's lots of reasons why that believer still wants to believe. They will say that it's because they want to be close to God and because they don't want to risk, eternal separation from God in hell. That's, of course, the logical script that they're giving you. But if we look at the psychology that is happening underneath, we see a totally different answer. And that's what we're talking about here today. We have in the brain a type of motivated reasoning. And we're going to talk about the studies that show this in a little bit. But motivated reasoning is when you know what you want the answer to be, and so you work backward from that answer to make the explanation fit into that answer. So what's wild about this is that this is a provable, measurable feature of the human brain. And that when we are working with motivated reasoning and we're working with all the biases in the brain wants to stop the questions and instead have certainty, because certainty meant safety and safety meant life. Think once again about where we come from. Ancient humans, hundreds of thousands of years living in very primitive states. Those with certainty had safety, and those with safety had life. So let's go back to cognitive closure. Definitionally, it's the desire for a firm answer to a question, any firm answer to a question, as compared to the confusion or the ambiguity. So this is a need for cognitive closure that can be activated. And once it is activated, people aren't picky about what the answer is. They're motivated by getting an answer, not by getting the right answer. Because to see and ask and question if this is the right answer is going right back into critical thinking. And we don't want that. The human mind, the human body doesn't want to be critical thinking. That's not a natural state for it. So instead, the first answer that it clings to, that's the right answer. That's the answer that we want. That's the answer that we're going to justify. There's two stages of this. There's the seizing and the freezing, basically urgency and permanence. When you get an answer, there's an urgency to get an answer. And the permanence is that once that answer is there, it's locked in. This is so common. I mean, you can think about politics. You can think, of course, about religion, which I love to talk about. But you can think about marketing too. I mean, the way that we build landing pages and websites is such so that people create certain answers that allows them to lock in on why they should still buy this product. This is most effective when people are already vulnerable. And they're vulnerable basically because of fear, shame, and guilt. They're vulnerable because of some sort of a trauma, some sort of a major life change, something that makes them back into a state of uncertainty, that puts them back into a state of uncertainty. That's when they're most vulnerable to cognitive closure. That's when they want cognitive closure the most. And this is what the whole self-contained system inside of Christianity runs on. It's a system that guarantees an answer to everything you can possibly ask. So Christianity, in effect, through this brain button, becomes a machine that satisfies this answer for certainty. And the craziest part, once again, is that it doesn't have to be a true answer. It just has to arrive fast enough to be grabbed, it has to be urgent enough, and it has to be sticky enough to be permanent, to freeze. The need to have everything be explainable is a core feature of the human mind, and this need for certainty is very easily exploitable. I don't believe that humans naturally have this super craving for certainty. I think in general people have a little bit more of a relaxed view on their need for certainty, but in Christianity they are taught and trained to have that certainty. This need for certainty can be activated and primed. And eventually, when people are maybe have doubts about Christianity, or they're kind of thinking about other ways of seeing the world, it's very difficult to go from the religious structure of Christianity, where everything has an answer and a why and a reason and a way of explaining it. It's hard to go from that to go from potentially atheism or agnosticism or any other ism, which doesn't have that certainty built in. In religion, they sell you the certainty that the world is this way, and it's very difficult to go from that to go from maybe an honest view of science and current knowledge, which has a lot of less certainty. Science doesn't tell you this is the truth, and if you believe it, you will live forever in heaven with God. It doesn't say this is the truth and this is the certainty you can have from it. Science says this is as far as we know so far about life and about the world and about the human condition, and you have to decide for yourself what you're going to do with this information so far. That is a totally different offering, and it is very difficult for someone that has that certainty to go to a place that doesn't have that certainty. So religion is creating the need for this certainty, which cannot be replicated without another closed system. It's like religion is creating the need for religion. And it makes it very difficult for people to ever think their way out of it. This is why when people start deconstructing and they start critically thinking about this stuff, it's not like, oh yeah, I just don't believe anymore. It's usually a 1% change. It's usually like, okay, well, you're right. Maybe my denomination wasn't the best one. Or, you're right. Maybe the way this book is being interpreted isn't the best way to interpret it. Or it's like, hey, you know what? Maybe what I was taught in church, maybe I have to do some more historical research into that. But it's not all of a sudden like, you're right, Jesus never existed. I don't believe in Jesus at all anymore. No, it's because that would be going from certainty to uncertainty. And to do that, they have to continue to grab on the monkey branch, on the rock climb holds, on the rock climb rocks of the next level of certainty. And so that's why when you watch people deconstruct, it's not something that happens immediately. It takes years sometimes decades. This need of certainty that is being created by religion is dangerous, because it means that anyone that comes along with more certainty can take over the minds of those who do not have certainty, because the certainty is a need. If the certainty wasn't needed, then it wouldn't be as exploitable, because people just say, okay, I don't know. Okay, big deal. If I don't know, then that's not a big deal. Let me just go to the grocery store and get my food and move on with my life. I don't need to know everything about every little detail. But when you sell that, and you sell that as a system, it's very difficult to be without it. So let's think of some examples that are closed systems that provide this certainty to their people. One that I thought of was the manosphere. It provides certainty to men that are struggling with getting dates, power, or money. The manosphere is a series of beliefs about why women are this way and why men are this way that is giving men a way to live their life that provides certainty, that provides them eventually with dates, power, and money. Same with feminism. It provides a certainty, it provides a system of answers for women that feel disenfranchised by men or by the patriarchy. It gives them a way to explain it. And it gives them all of the answers for this. Next is political tribalism. Whether you're liberal or conservative, politics provides a certainty that this is the right way to see and to fix the world. And of course, religion, it provides certainty of the afterlife, and it provides certainty of the structure for how to live in this physical world. So what is the research on this cognitive closure thing? What is the research on this motivated reasoning? We have a few here. And it goes pretty deep. I mean, you can only go so far in this video, right? But the need for cognitive closure is a trait that is on a spectrum. So some people have a high need of cognitive closure, some people have a low need, etc. And certain people that have a higher need for cognitive closure are more likely to get into dogmatic religious systems and or systems that give them all the answers that they could possibly ask. In marketing, to be frank with you, in marketing, we actually learn to develop this in landing pages and in websites, is we learn to create the material on the website that would answer all objections that the person has. So anytime that they're browsing the website and they're thinking, hey, is this the product for me? Should I spend the money on this? What are the features and terms of this product? We are creating the marketing material in a way that is going to solve all of their possible questions. And we're creating a closed system around the logic of why they should buy this product. Next, we have motivated reasoning. Motivated reasoning, like we mentioned before, is when people encounter evidence that threatens the belief they're motivated to keep. The brain works backwards and it finds reasons to reject the evidence instead of updating the belief. So they'll find a way to explain their conclusion with this new information without changing the conclusion. Christians, of course, and the church provide an excellent example of this. Religion provides a level of certainty and closed loop thinking that has won over billions of people for thousands of years. Not because the arguments are better, but because it is usually the first confident voice that answers all of these questions that the people can possibly have when things go wrong. So that's when there's grief, there's a crisis, they lose their job, they lose a loved one, there's some sort of diagnosis of a medical emergency. When people are in that state where the rug is ripped out from under them, that is when they're most vulnerable to the closed loop system of religion and Christianity. And I can prove it to you. Ask your local Christian for their testimony. Ask them how and why they got to an existence with Christ. Ask them how Jesus came into their life. And they will tell you. Go ask. I promise you, this is literally mind-blowing to me. Every single time I ask a Christian for their testimony, they tell me that they were living wrong. They were lost. They were in sin. They were in some unhealthy life situation. They had all these bad habits. They thought, they were in the drugs. They were in the alcohol. They were doing all these terrible things. They were lonely. They were depressed. You name it. Any negative state of being they were in, depending on which Christian you ask, but if you ask most of them, you will get the entire list of them. They were in a bad place, and Jesus saved them from this life. So it goes back to proving that when people are vulnerable, when they're in this bad state of their life, that's when they are most vulnerable to the closed loop thinking that some of these structures can offer. There's a book called Understanding Religious Conversion by Louis Rambo. And long story short, it's a long book. There's a bunch of stuff in there. We're not going to cover it all today. But long story short about this book is that religious conversion works the same regardless of what religion we're talking about, whether it's Buddhism, whether it's Islam, whether it's Hinduism, whether it's Christianity. The conversion process follows these 7 stages. And the second stage is crisis. The second stage of people converting to a religion is that there is a problem in their life. There's a catalyst. There's a reason for why they need to convert, for why they need to change their life in this direction. Like we said before in their testimony, their lives are bad, they're in bad habits, they're in an unhealthy life situation, they're living in sin, quote unquote. Which honestly anyone can do. I mean, if you spend time doing anything unhealthy for long enough, eventually you have to make a change. And that is one of the core mechanisms, the core stages of religious conversion. They're in a bad place, religion gets them to a better place. It dawns on them that their current framework for how they were living doesn't work for them anymore, and that's what makes the change necessary. We're not going to go into all the detail here. There's literally so much research in that area. It's fascinating, but it's a topic for another video. So add to all of this closed system thinking that is very appealing to people when they're in a vulnerable state. Add to that all the other brain buttons that are present in how people become convicted and convinced of religion. So we have the closed system we have religious closed system as one of these mechanisms, but there are many more. There's authority, there's following the group, there's identity fusion. These are psychological mechanisms. These are other brain buttons that bypass critical thinking. They stop people from asking questions. One is, of course, the authority. Who are we following and why? For some people, it's God himself. It's the word of God himself. That's the highest authority you can possibly fathom. Another of these psychological mechanisms that stops the questions is following the group. What is the group doing? Let's look around. And this is a mammalian instinct. It's look around at what everybody else is doing, what the herd is doing, and if they're doing it, then it's safe for me to do too. And that stops the questions. Another one is identity fusion. When you have the authority and you have the group, you feel safe to become part of the group. You say, I am this part of the group. I am a Christian. I'm a new creation in Christ. When you fuse your identity to it, it's one more thing that stops the critical thinking, that stops the questions. When you have these, and there are 4 more, by the way, 4 more that I've identified, and there's probably 10 more that I haven't sat down to identify. You have a very powerful, nearly unbreakable belief system in the minds of many believers. And this is why when you ask them those original questions that we said about why does God do this and that, the answers like free will make sense to them. The answers like the context make sense to them. It was a different time. That makes sense to them because there's a lot of other emotional propping that is being done through this belief system. So let's go back and finish this up here. The point of this video is not to say that religion is wrong, but if we as a society aren't aware of these very human tendencies, we can easily be swept away by a system that says that it has the answers for us. These features of the human brain that we just mentioned, it means that it's extremely unlikely that you or me or anyone else is going to argue someone out of this closed system, especially if it's a religious closed system. This is very obvious when we study the answers of how people become convinced of their religion, aka their testimony, like we just did. Most Christians joined religion when their need for cognitive closure was at its peak, when they needed answers the most. And this is because of some sort of adverse life situation. And this institution of church or religious institution in general provides a framework for thinking that satisfies this core need for cognitive closure. It gives them a thinking framework, a way to think about these circumstances in their life that becomes a closed system, becomes a closed loop. There's no answer that you can ask. There's no question that you can ask that doesn't fall inside of the closed loop. And this cognitive closure, think of it like a closed door. Once that cognitive closure is reached and that door is closed, it cannot be opened again until either that person chooses to open it, which is extremely unlikely because it fires their fear-based survival mechanisms, which the religion was already solving, or it won't open again unless some sort of external stimulus forces them to change their approach to life, which is a lot how people started religion to begin with. So they're not going to change their minds because this door is closed. And the door can only be opened either by them choosing to, which is extremely unlikely, or by some external stimulus which forces them to change their approach. And I'm not saying that I hope that it happens to anyone. I hope for prosperity and peace for all involved. But I'm just saying life has a way of being life. And sometimes there's something that's just going to force someone to look at the world a different way. Every human being on earth has to solve for this psychological need, has to solve for this brain button. Every human being on earth has their own personal version of the closed system. Even within religion, even within Christianity, every believer has it a little bit tweaked, a little bit differently. They interpret certain texts or certain books a little bit differently. For some people, in order to solve this need for the closed system, they learn as much as they can to develop their own closed system of answers. Some people, to solve this need, go to religion. Other people, to solve this need for a closed system, develop very relaxed needs around certainty. They're able to live in mystery without needing to have an answer for every aspect of why life is the way that it is. These people can flow in the grander scheme of the unknown without having their need for certainty ever be fully satisfied. I think this is the most sovereign and most powerful version of us as human beings because it makes us immune to influence and manipulation of any kind when it comes to the closed system. But please, what do you think? What did I get wrong, and how can I be looking at this differently? If you want to explore more, check out my book called Sold on God, What the Church Sold You That You Never Agreed to Buy. Link is in the description. If you like this video, please let me know. See you in the next one. Peace.